So
Yeah.
I thought we would start tonight, although, Francis, you've been in the news. My impression from history is that people get in the news for doing something extraordinary and complicated, and everyone has like a general idea of what happened, but the actual specifics kind of fade, especially because news comes at you fast in the 21st century. Could you maybe give us like a whistle-stop tour of what you did, what the documents that you brought out revealed, and what effect they had?
So I always try to acknowledge all of the activists that came before me who said the same things that I said over a period of about 10 years before I came forward in October 2021. Because there were a lot of people who said over and over again, there's problems with kids, there's problems with human trafficking, there's problems with radicalization, there's problems with cartels actively like using the platform to cause terror in Mexico. Like on and on and on, all these things were being said by people. But the thing that stopped the conversation from going forward was Facebook knew that the only people who could prove definitively what was happening on Facebook was Facebook itself. And so they would use the same playbook over and over again. They go, that's so sad. Unfortunately, it's anecdotal. This is not a representative experience of our platform. So the thing that I did was when I saw that Facebook dissolved the civic integrity team. So this was the only part of Facebook that was growing by 2021, Facebook Blue. That's the main website. When they dissolved that team right after the 2020 elections. So for context, that was the team that was working on things like ethnic violence. That was the team that was working on how do we make sure that Facebook doesn't cause another Myanmar situation where the UN said, hey, your negligence and your blind sites led to the death of 25,000 people. You know, how do we make sure that it's a positive force in elections? How does it make sure we're a positive force in civil discourse? They came in and said, good, there's no blood on the streets, success, we're done, mission accomplished. And as a result, there was no one on deck in December of 2021, or excuse me, of 2020, to raise their hand and say, hey, you know, there are single people on Facebook that are inviting 300,000 people to stop the steal groups. You know, there are people actively organizing and trying to weaponize the platform. And so I went through and began, I had to think for a while on how to do this in a way that could actually be successful, that would actually not get terminated too soon, kind of thing. And working with Jeff Horowitz, who's a journalist for the Wall Street Journal, who broke the eventual story, I brought out 22,000 pages of documents documenting a wide set of allegations. And what changed was all of those claims by activists now had proof. They had proof that when Facebook said those things are anecdotal, they're not real, that Facebook knew those problems were real. And it began, I think, a cycle where, you know, in the time since, we've had at least 3 other very senior tech executives come forward with major whistleblowing. So Uber had a head of policy who brought out about 200,000 documents. We had Mudge, who was the chief security officer at Twitter, come out and say, here's the set of problems that are endangering society on Twitter. This is even before Elon. And we most recently had the original engineering manager for trust and safety at Facebook testify before the Judiciary Committee, which is very exciting in my mind. The Judiciary Committee of the Senate saying, I went and asked girls under the age of 16 on Instagram, have you had an unwanted sexual contact on Instagram in the last 7 days? So in the last week. And 1 in 8 girls, a lot of these aren't even really teenagers yet, these girls said yes. He sent that information to all the senior executives. Some of them wrote him back, multiple of them met with him. They said, you need to not distribute these findings internally, even though this is a man who had probably more expertise in safety, trust and safety at Facebook than anyone else in the company. Do not distribute these findings, talk about them only in the hypothetical. And because that one man said, hey, I want to make sure there's a paper trail for history, we today had a huge push of news around, what were, like, he was able to actually point at where the bodies were buried. And so it's been a very, very exciting 2 years, and we've kind of reached a crescendo just in the last month.
So you mentioned the the people, small number of individuals who invited 300,000 individuals.
No, one person invited 300,000.
One person who invited
Yeah.
300,000 people to
Yeah.
the Stop the Steal thing. And there's kind of a, like maybe a very naive top-level view of that that's like, wow, that guy was really popular. He had 300,000 friends on Facebook. But that's
Yeah.
not really what happened, right?
Yeah.
There was some countermeasure instituted on Facebook that was ideologically blind. It wasn't targeted at Stop the Steal. It was also about not inviting people to Black Lives Matter demonstrations or, chili cook-offs or anything else you wanted to do. And he somehow defeated this measure. So how did he do that?
I would guess, so like the document that I found where this was one of the examples, so the overall stat was 0.3% of people who sent out invites for Stop the Steal groups invited 30% of all the people who joined, which means probably 1% invited 60%, right? It's like one of these trade-off things. It wasn't like it was a democratic, like broad movement where people were inviting their friends. It's where people were systematically making sure as many people got invited as possible. What's interesting about this is Facebook back then, and I assume today, operates in a similar way, which is if you were invited to a group, it was considered that you were part of that group for 30 days, and they were going to start showing you content from it. And if you hit like, if you wrote a comment saying this is misinformation, they would say, oh, you interacted with it. You must like it. You're going to be a member now. And in the case of the 300,000, what's really interesting about that number is Facebook caps out how many friends you can have at about 5,000. And this is largely done for mathematical reasons because it causes certain kinds of complexity when you build these engineering systems. He had to have been, he or she, we don't know, had to have been going and finding people, likely in analogous groups, sending out friend requests, many of which were accepted, while he was deleting friends that he had already invited to groups, because he had to be friends with these people to invite them. But he also was able to run through that 5,000 person buffer in a systematic enough way that he invited 300,000 people. Like, this was not an accident. This wasn't casual. It was a small number of people who knew they were violating the policies of the platform. They would they would post on their groups, here's our Discord link for when we get banned. It was adversarial. And
so the point is that Facebook built a fairly weak security measure, this 5,000 cap and these limits on whatever. And then they also built these other tools that had different priorities, priorities about how they would order your customized feed that took these very weak signals like liking or even arguing with a post and changing your feed. And that this person was able to abuse this. And that the hack itself, well, you hear it and you're like, oh yeah, it's modestly clever, shouldn't have been hard to detect or to take a countermeasure against. And given that this was at a moment of intense political significance, it literally threatened the integrity of the American election, you would think that would be a moment in which a firm with a market cap edging up to $1 trillion a year that makes more money off of its American users than it does off of users anywhere else in the world could have allocated those resources to discover this and stop it. At a certain point, you have to say, either you knew or you should have known. Is that the point?
Yeah, so I think it's one of these things where we saw with Ukraine, or with what's happening in Israel and Gaza, information warfare now is one of the fronts in any given war. That is just the future of warfare. You're going to have a cyber war as part of your effort. In a world where the only people who get to see the full picture are these platforms, we are delegating critical national security functions to a private company with no oversight who's only being judged on how profitable they are or like how low their expenses are. And I'll give you a small example. When I was there were, so my last team, so the last 8 months I was at Facebook, ironically, I worked on counter-espionage on the threat intelligence team. I know, I like to say the universe tends towards irony, and the sister team of the counter-espionage team was the information operations team, like the influence operations team. And there were only about 20 people on that team. You had 20 people for the entire world whose job was to find people doing these kind of coordinated actions and document them sufficiently that you could take them off the platform. And I did a project across all of the different teams in threat intelligence. So this is people looking for child predators. This is people looking for scammers. This is people looking for cartels and terrorists. These are all different functions to work on detection infrastructure. And the thing I was shocked by was you could probably allocate between like 3 and 5 engineers. Like, think about this. This is a company that has tens of billions of dollars of profit at this point. You could invest 3 to 5 engineers, and you'd probably catch 100x as many influence operations, or 100x as many child predators, because they didn't build even the basic tooling that would allow you to detect even people who were repeat offenders, right? They had these huge documentation processes where you had to really robustly prove this person deserved to be taken off the platform. But they didn't have good ways of saying, oh, now that we kicked you off, you came back. Do we have easy ways of even finding you? So it's one of these challenges where the platforms, Facebook made a promise, Mark Zuckerberg made a promise in front of the US Congress after the Russia incident, or after 2016, where he said, if we find an information operation, we will take it down and we will tell you. And this is one of those kind of, when we don't have legal frameworks around accountability, or like what is enough, that actually is a discouragement from finding information operations. Because if you actually have the right tooling, and people are like, there's 100 times as many, then suddenly people want to be involved in that process.
So Nick Clegg, who's the Deputy Prime Minister, former Deputy Prime Minister of the United Kingdom.
Bless his heart.
Amazingly, he found a thing he's worse at and more destructive than being the Deputy Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, which is being Facebook's head of international relations and speaker to governments. And he makes this argument over and over again, particularly in Europe, that Facebook, by dint of its incredible resources, is uniquely situated to act as a referee and maybe an EMT or like a cop on the beat for these information warfare initiatives. That if the internet were composed of lots of little websites instead of 5 giant websites filled with screenshots of text from the other 4, that these tiny little websites would just be overwhelmed by these bad guys with state actors with enormous resources, and that they would just be crushed. And so Facebook must be preserved, its power must be preserved, because Facebook uniquely has the power reserves needed to defend the world from nefarious actors. So I guess I know that this feels like there should be a question at the end of that, but I feel like the question is, what do you think of that? Like, does Nick Clegg's argument hold water?
So I always like to say, some people think Mark Zuckerberg is my nemesis, and I'm like, no. Like, I feel a huge amount of empathy for him. Like, he lives a very isolated, estranged life. During the peak of the metaverseness, journalists were telling me the reason why he thinks we're going to live in the metaverse is because he's spending 10 to 12 hours a day there. Like, my theory is no one can grimace at him in the metaverse because those cartoony features couldn't even like smile. But maybe I'm projecting. You never know. But Nick Clegg is definitely my nemesis because he is just such a smooth operator, and I question if he has any ethics. So one, never trust anything Nick Clegg says. Like when he wrote a blog post called "It Takes Two to Tango," that basically said, when you accuse us of leading you to extreme content, be careful when you point a finger for pointing back at you. You picked your friends, you picked your interests. And at that point, they had already run a study at least 4 times, where if you took a brand new account and you followed like a couple of center-right or center-left things, and you just clicked on what they gave you, and you followed the groups that they suggested, or you joined the groups they suggested, and you just did this each day. Within a few days, you start getting QAnon, if you're on the right. Within 2 weeks, you start getting white genocide content. If you're on center-left, you start getting stuff within 3 weeks of, should you kill Republicans? The idea that it takes 2 to tango when, very clearly the algorithm is just leading you places. It's pretty rich. So in the case of information operations, one can imagine a hypothetical framework where that might be true. Right, I'm willing to my husband's very good at this. He's trying to instill in me this idea of, can you steel man your opponent's argument? I can imagine a world in which that could hypothetically be true. So for example, let's say we have auditors. Like you have to let academics in and see what your processes are. You have to post things like, how do you know the scope of your problem? Right? Like part of why we were told not to build detection tools for counterespionage was we only worked on a third of the cases we knew about because we had so little staffing. Like if we had detection tools, then we'd find out we only were touching 1%, and that would look bad. You can imagine things where you said, hey, you have to tell us how you know how much of the problem you're touching. You have to give us performance studies. We get to interview your employees regularly so that we can tell, like, do they feel like they're not covering the problem? Like, you can imagine a hypothetical structure, but none of that exists today. And what I do know is that when I've had high-level conversations with like the security apparatuses of different countries, and they describe to me what they were told by Facebook, I'm like, that's just not true. They describe hundreds and hundreds of people searching for the information operations, and like they're so vigilant and XYZ. And this is the problem. Systems that are opaque, so that's things where we don't know what's happening on the data center. We don't know what the code is. We don't know what the man is behind the curtain. Opaque systems inherently go off the rails because there's no feedback cycle. Like with an iPhone, go search on Google for Apple Whistleblower. Like the one that shows up is like from 2017, and I've never heard of them. Why are there no Apple whistleblowers? And I think it's because, when they sell a new iPhone, within a couple of hours, there are videos on YouTube of people taking that phone apart, or people running benchmarks and saying, yes, it can do that thing. But in the case of Facebook, they can go in front of very, very important people in the world, people whose actual job is to keep us safe, and just straight up lie about what they do, and there's no way to check it. And so I don't like a world where I have to rely on Nick Clegg to keep me safe.
So I want to ask about this argument about radicalization, because I'm not sure where I sit on this. Like, I know that if I were to go to YouTube, we recently put in a new kitchen. We went to some places that sold cabinetry. I saw some joinery that looked cool. I didn't know the words.
Woodworking.
I typed some queries and I found out it's called joinery, finished carpentry. I typed those words into YouTube. Suddenly I was looking at videos about it, and down the suggestion were more esoteric kinds of joinery. And so soon I was looking at Japanese nailless joinery. And then I was looking at Japanese nailless joinery that uses a very specific technique, and it's hypnotic to watch. And I look at that and I'm like, well, this is a radicalization funnel, right? I started with a very broad query, right? I am interested in this thing. And while it's true that the 4 icons down the edge...
Welcome to our tribe.
Right.
That's all I got to say.
Yeah, so yes. So the 4 icons down the side are being chosen by the platform, right? So they are guiding my path through, right? They're constraining those choices. They're not showing me 50 things related to joinery. They're picking 4. But I'm the one drilling down to this very specific kind of joinery. What is it about that we worry about showing 300,000 people an odious lie about election stealing?
Oh, no, but so that was just one person.
Sure,
So
or
like
3 million or 300 million. Is it that among 300
Sure.
million people, if it's 1% of people are susceptible to it, then if you cast the funnel wide enough, then you've got 3,000 people who become hardcore election deniers. Is that the theory?
So a couple things in there. So one, I want to talk about a little bit like from in a democracy, what should you get to know about why you're being shown information? But then I want to get to what you said about radicalization.
Sure.
So one of the things that I personally think is unacceptable is, the internet in 2010, when we had the Arab Spring, like, there's no algorithms on Facebook, right? Like, you saw stuff because your friends sent it to you. Groups were of a size, there were a few thousand people. It was more like your email inbox than like what it is today. And today, like, they can push you into a group that has 1 million members, that produces 1,000 pieces of content a day, and you're not even aware that you don't see 999 of them. It's one of these things where, like, you're seeing a tiny part of the puzzle and you don't know what part of that is. And you don't have a sense of, like, am I seeing a representative part of reality? Or are there biases? There's no one watching the watchers. And you can imagine a world where YouTube came in and said, when people go down these your joinery rabbit hole.
Sure.
I love woodworking, so I mean, like, I'm not gonna dissuade you. More people to talk to, even better. This is what happens when you get an engineering degree and then you do software. You're like, can we still build things?
Right.
To which my husband always replies, "I'm so glad you like building things, because I get to enjoy them." So imagine if YouTube said, "Hey, we're going to publish every day a random 1,000 of these trails." Right? Like, we're not giving any personal information, right? Sure. It's like literally just going down. If they just did that, I would be like, oh, I feel much more comfortable with the idea that you direct our information environment, because now we can go in there and ask questions about it and say, like, what's the general pattern of these things? But the second question is, in the case of Facebook, like, when they went and talked to the Jan 6 people, like, I'm willing to go on a limb and call some of those people patriots. Like, there are people there who genuinely thought the Republic was at risk. When they opened they said, when I opened my Facebook feed, everything I saw said the election had been stolen and that the Republic was under a threat. And what I did was I thought I was doing my civic duty. And it's really hard if you were not one of those people to understand, why did they see this? So, when that person went and invited 300,000 people to groups, and the other, like, couple thousand people who were actively, like, mass pulling people in, it's likely many of those people didn't get invited to one group. They got invited to one of the many clone groups of Stop the Steal. And that meant that they weren't getting one post about Stop the Steal each day. They were getting a bunch of posts on a bunch of things. And they were getting posts, so one of the ways the feed works is if you have a post and a fight starts in the comments, every new comment requalifies that post to go up in your feed. So I'll give you an example. One of the things that I personally worked on at Facebook was around, can we segment a country in a privacy-sensitive way into coherent communities? Like, it's not appropriate for me to say, are you Black? Are you Chinese? Are you a rural, like a rural person? Like, or are you Republican? Like, it's not my job to put a label on you, but I can say, you seem to behave in coherent ways with these other people, you engage in the same sources of information, you like the same things, you do all these things, you seem to be coherent. And we'll give that group a number. So we divided up the United States into 600 of these groups, ranging in size from like 500,000 people to 3 million. And what we found was that when you looked at who saw the COVID misinfo, vaccine misinfo kind of stuff, 80% of the misinfo went to groups comprising 4% of the population. So the reason we had people showing up at school board meetings in the United States and threatening board members with guns, or showing up at teachers' houses and threatening them with guns, beyond the fact we have no gun laws, I understand. Yes, we are barbaric, I fully acknowledge, is that if you were getting COVID misinformation, you were getting flooded with it. And that happened because you have a post, if it starts a fight, it goes to the top of the feed over and over and over again. And so it's not a lot of content, but you see it over and over again. And so I think it's one of these things where when you see a filtered version of the world, you can be a rational person and still come to believe really extreme things. And I think that's where I get worried, that we each individually don't know if we have suddenly found ourselves in one of those pockets. And I think it's really hard to say that person sought out that experience when maybe the group that led them into that experience was actually just like a mom's group. They had a baby last year. Like, did they want to get flooded with misinfo? Did they know that was what was happening to them? Because most people don't think about how these feeds are constructed or how they change.
So one of the things that disturbs me about the argument that Facebook is uniquely situated to protect us, it's often posed as a corollary to why we need to eliminate the dark corners of the internet, 4chan and 8chan and 2chan and 8kun and all these places where bad people congregate, is that it implies that the way that we are made safe and the way that we can have the best future possible is to either perfect Mark Zuckerberg or replace him with someone better suited to sit and decide how our online experience works. Now, you're describing something that is manifestly unsuited, right? An institution manifestly unsuited to hold that role. But, for me, I'm like, I would like to have lots more dark corners where people who Mark Zuckerberg has not been nice to, like trans people who didn't want to use their dead names, and drag queens who wanted to use their stage names, and indigenous people who wanted to use their indigenous names, and people who were kicked off because they were documenting war crimes and they were banned for posting war crime images because they were documenting war crimes. All these people who didn't have a hospitable home on Facebook, rather than making Facebook hospitable to them, maybe something we should do, I also just want to evacuate Facebook. I want to put those people in their own places where they get to decide how they live their lives.
Yeah. One of the big, there's no question in there, but I'll turn it into a question for you.
Right.
I'm a very big fan of Corey, and gotta celebrate people as they are, right? So one of the big points of tension right now in the United States around kids and online safety for kids is, there's a lot of kids that are queer who are in families that don't necessarily accept that's the way they are, right? And so for those kids, the internet can be a place that gives them a sense of acceptance. It can save kids' lives, right? It's important. And I had a lawyer who's working on one of these kids' class action suits say a comment on a panel that I was really struck by, and it made me begin thinking this way, which was, she has to listen to these things all the time. She's a lesbian, and she's like, I don't understand what is so special about social media that it provides something that the internet wasn't already giving us before we had social media, right? That she woke up to the fact that she was gay. She found her community in the good old days of bulletin boards, right? Like, we're old enough that we're like, oh, was it not Alta Vista?
Ultimate BBS?
Yes,
BBS, PHP, or whatever it was called,
the world changes, right? But we need to remember that there used to be an internet that gave us community that wasn't owned by a single trillion-dollar corporation. Or, we had community even when AIs didn't tell us what we should care about, right? Do we want people to tell us what to care about, or do we want AIs? Do we want to have groups, for marginalized groups, do we want them to be reliant on having community provided by a for-profit trillion-dollar corporation, or do we want community provided by our community? And that idea that we need to be owners of our internet, or that we should be citizens instead of subjects. So there's a guy named Ethan Zuckerman at UMass Amherst, who's one of my favorite academics in the space.
Me too.
And he says, we have become accustomed that we should be grateful to our digital kings for giving us free products, instead of citizens who have responsibilities and duties, but also have rights. If you don't like your king, you can go to a new kingdom, right? That's why people flee to Twitter, X, right? They're like, I want, Lord Elon, or because very few people are on Team Mark. They just kind of endure Team Mark. Like I said, I don't have any hate for him. I just worry about him. But we don't have this idea of, I should be doing some of the content moderation for my community. I should be giving feedback. I should be playing a proactive role because it's my community, right? I'm a citizen. I also get to have input. We should be able to weigh in on policies. And I hope that we live in a world in 5 years where as we get more and more decentralized technologies, we have more and more people waking up to this idea that we can live in spaces where marginalized people own their spaces.
So you bring up an interesting point, which is that people can move from one place to another. But of course, it's hard to move from one place to another.
Totally.
Just talking with my family about the fact that my dad was a Soviet refugee, but much of his family stayed behind.
Yeah.
And they're continuing to stay behind now, even though things are very bad. And it's basically because there's the very hard problem of you want to go, but someone who matters to you and your family doesn't. This is a problem on Facebook too, right?
Yeah.
You're enmeshed in a group, and that's your friends, and it's your relatives, and it's the people who organize the kids' Little League pool, carpool, and it's also all your customers.
Or
and the
your
support
school
group.
district says you have to be on it for your kids.
Exactly. Or your rare disease group, right?
Yeah.
And you're all there, and maybe some of you are sick, and you're providing support. So it's very hard to coordinate this. One of the remedies that policymakers are increasingly turning to is interoperability, forcing these companies to stand up gateways. Now, when Facebook kicked off, the way they got people off MySpace was by giving them a bot, and you gave it your login and password. It would go to MySpace, scrape all the email waiting for you in MySpace, put it in your Facebook inbox. You could reply to it, and it would send it back out to MySpace.
Oh, I didn't know that.
When
That's
Power
fascinating.
Ventures did this to Facebook, they reduced them to radioactive rubble, right?
Yeah.
Computer Fraud and Abuse Act, DMCA 1201, all these claims. What do you think of these interoperability remedies? The European Union's got the Digital Markets Act. In the US, there's the Access Act, which may come back next year. What do you think?
I think it's really complicated. I'll give you an example on the Digital Markets Act. So my issue with the Digital Markets Act is I really like encrypted communication. So I'm going to say something that pisses off the Signal people. So I always say my primary social media is Signal, to which they say, we are not a social network, we are a messaging platform, because they don't want to deal with the rest of it. But like, it is my social media, right? Like, I have a bunch of group chats. One's called, like, I get my news from Doom News, of all the dark news in the world. I have a cooking channel. I have one that's like, one of my friends like hosts the neighborhood bar. Like, I get all my social connection that way. There's no algorithms telling me what to focus on. I know the vast majority, but not all the people I talk to. You can argue back with people. The problem for me with the Digital Markets Act is, who here has ever been in a group chat where like some people are on Apple devices and some people are on Android devices? You end up having to interoperate between platforms with different standards. And in my case, like, I don't want my messages sent to WhatsApp. Right? So like in a group chat, like where there's some people who are on WhatsApp and some people who are on Signal, does that mean like I am going to have a group chat where I say I don't want to send messages to those two WhatsApp people? So like I think I'm having a conversation with everyone, but like they're never seeing my responses. Can they send stuff to me, but they can't see my response? There's a lot of these little edge cases where like the question of like what does it mean to actually be interoperable when part of what the experience that you're consuming is a feeling of security. Like, it's complicated. Like, I don't spend a lot of time thinking on these things, but I do know I don't want to send my messages to WhatsApp, but that might be a me issue.
I mean, I hear you. I'm a Zucker vegan. I don't have Facebook, I don't have WhatsApp, I don't have Facebook Messenger,
That is
I don't
a
have
great
Threads,
phrase.
I'm not a legless, sexless, low polygon cartoon character
Yeah.
in the metaverse.
They have legs now, like,
Fantastic. The
I know,
breakthroughs.
Yeah.
But at the same time, like as much as I
Yeah.
don't want my messages in a
Yeah.
WhatsApp group, what I really don't want
Yeah.
is a device that tells people what programs I'm using if I don't think it's any of their damn business.
Totally.
Right?
Yeah.
So I hear what you're saying.
Yeah.
There was an important revelation this week about how kids, particularly
It's a good
preteens,
week.
interact with Facebook.
Yeah.
One of your successor whistleblowers from Facebook came up with some stuff. I wonder if you could
Sure.
summarize it.
Yeah,
Tell
yeah.
us what you think about
Okay,
this.
so I keep being surprised. I have to always remind myself, I follow this news much more closely than the average person, so like, no judgment. Who here has heard about the Attorney General's lawsuit in the United States? Okay, so I'm gonna give you guys, we're gonna experience a moment of history together. Very rarely can you look back in your life and be like, I lived through history, but we are actually doing that right now. So way back in time, let's roll back to the 80s, we had known for 35 years, 40 years that cigarettes gave people cancer, right? It's not like it was news. But like we've been told things like, oh, we have filtered cigarettes, like there are all these different things.
Light cigarettes.
Light cigarettes. And it was kind of in this like standoff because the Supreme Court said the FDA did not have the power to regulate it, and Congress couldn't bring itself to act. It's kind of like today. And on so many issues, like funding the government, little problems with the United States. But the attorney generals all came together and said, hey, this whistleblower came forward showing you knew that you were targeting kids, you knew that these things were addictive, you knew that blah, 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 and you lied to us, we're suing you. And that's how they resolved that issue. And every year, I think it's like $1 billion is spent on like advertising suppressing cigarettes. And like you can't put TV ads anymore for cigarettes and a bunch of other stuff. Similarly, with opiates, the thing that brought down Purdue Pharma was their executives got up in front of the Senate and said, hey, we never knew until this one woman started like making a big deal about it that this could be abused. And again, the government had documents from doctors where they said, I wrote to them and said, no, people are crushing this, they're snoring it, it can be abused. Very similarly, the lawsuit that was brought did not say, you used illegal algorithms, you used XYZ illegal technique. It said, hey, you told the public you were not doing the following things, that you would never do that. When internally the document said, people are intentionally engaging in patterns of behavior like, how are kids vulnerable? Let's go after those vulnerabilities. Like that's literally documents that came out today, or like in the last couple days. The key that happened was when those attorney generals sued, so we have 41 attorney generals, one's a 33 state combined thing, and then 8 were individual consumer protection suits. It was incredibly redacted. It was kind of set up like you'd read through and there'd be like a setup paragraph and then like redacted, punchline paragraph. And like people were like flipping through and be like, oh, this is torture. Like I can tell the good stuff is here, but I can't see it. And so it'd be things like the setup paragraph would be, we have known since the 60s that if you provide people with variable rewards, this is like the pellet thing, right? If you give them variable rewards, it is much more prone to causing addiction. This is like slot machines and gambling. Like that's verbatim, like that's what it says. And then redacted, like we're missing 4 paragraphs. And then punchline paragraph. And yet, as of July 2020, Facebook was still using these techniques, blah, 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 blah. So like what's in between, right? So some of the stuff that came out were things like Facebook knew that, speaking of Nick Clegg, so even Nick Clegg went to Mark Zuckerberg and said, hey, this is like 2020, we've been saying a lot about how much we care about kids and how we really prioritize their well-being and their health, and we're doing so much work. You know, our internal investment is not aligned at all with our outside messaging. So this is like serial liar Nick Clegg is like, hey, I think we might get caught, right? And Mark Zuckerberg and the CFO of Facebook was like, we don't have the budget for it, right? Or there's been so many different ones where I'm like, they're all starting to kind of bleed together for me. I'll give you another example. Nick Clegg, again, did another good thing. I try to give people credit when they do good things. Nick Clegg came together with basically all the other major executives and said, hey, we've been saying publicly we really care about kids' well-being. There are these filters on Instagram that let you simulate plastic surgery. We make no money off these. The academic literature says it's bad. It's just a bad look, too, right? Like, we probably shouldn't be encouraging 13-year-olds to do this. We should take these down. This is going to be a good thing. All the executives joined together to, like, sit down with Mark and be like, Mark, please be an adult. And he cancels the meeting the night before, and a week later sends out an email saying, there's market demand, we're not going to take them down. And the problem is that Mark has gone in front of the Senate multiple times and said, we do everything possible to protect kids. You know, every time we see an account under the age of 13, we take it down. And yet, again, one of the revelations from the last couple days, Facebook required, when someone came in and said, hey, this account is under 13, they would go investigate that account to see could they demonstrate that account was from an under 13-year-old, including cases where a mother reported her own daughter's 4 accounts and repeatedly emailed asking why hadn't they been taken down yet, right? At points, they had 2.5 million accounts that had been reported as being under 13 that they were still live because they hadn't actually allocated enough people to review them. Last thing. What year did Instagram start asking people how old they were? So Instagram was founded in 2011. Let's do guesses. What year did they start asking you, how old are you? 2019. But what year did they go back and say, okay, so we have hundreds of millions of Instagram accounts. We don't know how old they are. When did they actually start asking those? Never. 2021. So they started asking the week after they were asked for comment on the first story from the Facebook files. So we need transparency. We need accountability. When we have opaque systems, corners will be cut. People will not do their best behavior if they can operate in the dark. And these companies have monopolies, they have network effects, and they will continue to abuse that power as long as we let them.
So one of the things that strikes me about the whistleblower and leak stuff that comes out of tech is just how much they put in writing, right? You know, you mentioned that you had you're in all these Signal group chats. Very famously, Sam Bankman-Fried and his lieutenants were in a group chat called Wire Fraud. It's like these guys all have a folder on their desktop called mens rea, filled with files like, you know, premeditated murder.doc, you know.
Well, you got to put your plan somewhere.
Yeah. So all of this brings me to the relationship of the press to tech and a very made in Canada story. So we're made in first in Germany and then in Spain and then Australia, and now in Canada we have a news bargaining code. And I'm skeptical of it, and I wanted to get where you land on it. I think that big tech is definitely stealing something from the news, and it's the 30 cents they take out of every subscriber dollar, the 51 cents they take out of every ad dollar. They're stealing the news as money, but that like letting people talk about the news or indexing the news, that is stealing the news as content, is not what they're doing. And that when you make them profit sharers with the press, you get things like Torstar getting money from Google and then dropping its anti-big tech investigative series. And if you just made them stop stealing news as money, then it wouldn't just be newspapers owned by casino billionaires and, you know, the guy who owns all the lumber mills in New Brunswick and American vulture capitalists who bought Prost Media getting the lion's share of this money. Where do you sit on these news bargaining codes? And given that Facebook has pulled the news out of Canada now.
So I always try to like, you know, put an asterisk next to that concept of like they pull the news out of Canada. If you were to do a graph showing like how much news is distributed in Canada or even in the United States, you know, Facebook came out and very explicitly started saying in I think 2021, so it's kind of in the wake of January 6th, you know, we're just not going to distribute so much news. Like news causes a lot of problems for us. We get people complain all the time. And think about this for a second. Like when they say we're not going to distribute the news, what does that even mean? Like what counts as news? Like if we have a conspiracy theorist blog, is that the news or is it not the news? Because if it's not the news and you distribute that, but not the thing that actually has real reporting, that's a problem. And right now we have no idea. Like we have no idea how we're being censored, what we get to see or not see. But so that number, you know, the amount of news we've been seeing has been going down and going down and going down. So the little cliff at the very end, yes, they cut off the last like 10 or 20% at the end with the news bargaining code. But they still got rid of 80% of it in the United States, or they say things like for threads, so I'm sure all of you are threads users. They said explicitly, we will not amplify news. Right, it's the same thing again. Like, what does that mean? Like, what counts as the news? With regard to the bargaining code, you know, he gave an example, and I haven't had a chance to fact check this yet, because like one of the questions is like, you know, there's a difference between funds that you are guaranteed to, where like and funds that you get through the largesse of like a powerful person. And like when they got that funding, it was before the news bargaining code.
That's true.
Right, it was meant to like kind of take the steam off. And remember, they didn't know the news bargaining code was going to pass. And so that makes it more of a thing where like there's influence to be like, we're going to just play nice because we don't know how this is going to shake out, and we'd like them to keep giving us money. And there are a number of small publications like The Logic in Canada that have come out and said, we like the news bargaining code because we see that other publishers are getting payments for being, you know, pleasant. And we never got a payment, partially because we read a lot of really critical press. And so having things where people are entitled, this is kind of like the argument on like universal basic income, right? Like when you give people basic, you give, you know, funding where you say like, hey, you have stuff that you're entitled to help make your business work, you know, whether you are playing ball or not, like you deserve, like if we want to have this in our ecosystem, we have to have it. The last thing is, you know, this is an argument that my favorite academic, I don't know where in the audience he is, so Taylor Owen is at McGill. He's in the back somewhere. I've been gestured. Taylor said earlier today at an event we did at the Toronto Star, we perceive social media with a level of credibility, like the idea that this is where you have discussions, partially because for like 10 plus years, people posted a lot of news and we had a lot of discussions about the news on social media. You know, they built their credibility on this idea that this is where you had to be to have conversations, partially on the back of the contributions from the news. And we need to ask ourselves, you know, the news isn't just a question of like, do we want to have newspapers? Like, do we want to have this business model? It's the question of, in a democracy, if you don't have people doing the work of collecting facts, you have a problem. You know, there's very, very good data on towns that don't have local journalism have more corruption. Right? That person who sits there in the town hall meetings and like stays awake somehow as people drone on, like they're actually really important for democracy. And one of the things that I got really excited about earlier today was when we were talking to the Toronto Star, you know, they were asking about like what should be the role of AI in journalism. Right? Like right now, the economics of the business model don't facilitate sending a journalist to sit in a lot of those meetings. But if you have public recordings of them and you can have AI transcribe them and you can have AI start to filter and look for patterns, you can make it easier and more economical to have more coverage on more issues. What are those pieces that we should develop in an open source way so that not just Canadian journalists can use it, but so that Canada, the platform, could go out in the world and make journalism in Brazil better, and journalism in Buenos Aires better, and journalism in South Africa better. Because journalism around the world needs these tools. And we need to start thinking about it that way. How do we build common community, publicly accountable assets that allow us to do journalism in the 21st century?